Welcome. This is Steve Davis here with another edition of the Jefferson College TV JCTV Roundtable. Today I have what I think is going to be, in my opinion, probably the best program we've ever had for the roundtable discussion. December 16th, 1944, 64 years ago, began what history has referred to as the Argonne Offensive, or what's commonly referred to here in the States as the Battle of the Bulge. With me this afternoon here, we have two gentlemen, Harold Miller and Don Green, actual participants representing the United States forces in the battle, and Millie Canese, who was a wife of a soldier who participated, and the mother of a young, three-month-old baby of the soldier. And before we go into the battle and what it was like overseas, we thought we'd get a perspective. What was it like, Millie, growing up? You were young, married to a soldier, had a newborn child, and then we've got a war.
Well, the first to start off with, we didn't even think that he'd have to go to the war. We didn't even think that we were going to get into a war. That's why we got married on October the 18th, 1941. And against my parents' wishes, of course, because they were a little bit wiser than me and were listening to the radio more than I was. But we went ahead and we got married, and a year later we had the little boy. Well, 3 months later, Uncle Sam took him. And I'll tell you, that was one of the worst feelings. And when he left to leave, we went to Union Station. And at that time, Union Station was the hub of all the railroads coming in. And it was just loaded with soldiers and sailors, all kinds of servicemen leaving. And my whole family was there. And as we waited for the train to come in, for him to be called to the train, I wouldn't let my husband see how I felt. And the minute he left and walked down and got into that train, I turned around and I broke down. And I can still hear my father saying, I was afraid of that. But I was determined after he went into basic training, that he had only seen that baby for 3 months, that he was going to see him as much as possible while he was here in the States. So I decided that I was going to follow him wherever he went. Well, the first time he called and he said, why don't you try it for a week, Millie, and see if you can like it? I said, okay. So he was stationed down at Camp McCain, Mississippi, down in the little town of Winona, Mississippi. And he called me and he says, I have a ticket for you, a room for you right near the train station, and you won't have to walk too far, and I'll be there as soon as possible. So I bundled the baby up, and I go to this here place where he tells me to go. I wasn't in the room just 2 minutes, and thank God I had locked the door. There was a knock on the door, and I heard, how much, lady? Without thinking, my darling husband had put me in a whorehouse. Well, I was petrified. I screamed out, I'm alone here and I got a baby, and I said, I'm waiting for my husband. Well, this voice says, I'm sorry, lady, I hope I didn't disturb you. Well, you can rest assured, when my husband got there, we got out of there in a hurry. Well, I stayed the weekend, and I was more determined than ever that I was going to be with him. So about a week later, he called up and he says, I have a place for you in a boarding house in Grenada, Mississippi. What is the name of that? But anyway, it was with a Southern lady by the name of Mrs. Roberts. Well, I got in there, and Mrs. Roberts was a dyed-in-the-wool Southern woman. She said to me, she called me Miss Nyes. One day she said to me, Mrs. Nyes, those damn Yankees, they're ruining my town. And I says, Mrs. Roberts, I'm a Yankee. She says, no, you're not, Miss Nyes. You on the borderline. And surprisingly enough, when we go to the schools and I talk about this, I ask the students, do you know why she said I was on the borderline? Because I lived in southern part of Missouri. The children don't even know that Missouri was divided during the Civil War. But anyway, she didn't like me washing my husband's uniform or my baby's diapers in her bathtub with the little washboard. So she asked me if I could have another place to live. Well, at that time, because of everybody trying to follow their husbands, just like I, or their fathers, just like I was doing, everything was turned into housing, storefronts, garages, old warehouses. I was fortunate enough that I found a little two-room apartment over an old warehouse. Well, I set the baby's crib up that night, and when I walked in, I noticed that there was tin cans under the legs of the bed, but I didn't pay much attention to that. But I turned the lights out that night to go to sleep, and a few minutes later, I heard my baby crying. When I woke up and turned on the lights, I was horrified to find the baby and his bed covered with red roaches. When the lights went out and the sweetness of that baby and that warehouse, they just came out of the woodwork. Well, you can rest assured, I stayed up all night long, sitting cross-legged in the bed with my baby in my arms with the light lit. Now I knew why those tin cans were under the legs of the bed. They held kerosene to keep the roaches from crawling up the bed. Well, I was so horrified, and I went to the USO that day. Now, USO clubs, they were clubs that were set up in railroad stations and churches and various places to entertain a GI when he came in, give him a place to sleep or something to eat if he was on a pass or perhaps just passing through. And I was crying, and this USO lady wanted to know what was the matter. And being from the South, I told her all about the roaches, and she knew what to do. She says, if your baby's not crawling, just get some sodium fluoride, which is deadly poison, and put it all around the baseboard. But for heaven's sakes, woman, she said, keep all of your food stuff covered, because if those roaches crawl on your food, it's curtains. Well, I put up with that for about 3 months. My husband couldn't come in. He could only come in on the weekends. And finally, he told me that he was going to have to go on maneuvers for a while, and I should go home. So I went back to St. Louis, and about 2 or 3 weeks later, he called up and he says, honey, I got a place for you in South Carolina. And he was at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. And by that time, I'm a seasoned traveler. The taxi cab stops in front of this big antebellum home, and I'm looking. Boy, it's wonderful. I can sit on that porch with the baby in my arms. But this nice Southern lady, she takes me through the house and out the back door. There's a 2-story building there that the other servicemen's wives are living. It must have been a servant's quarters at one time. And they waved at me as we went by, past a big coal pile. Way in the back was a little one-room shack that she used to use for washing their clothes, but she had added a bathroom, and I could still wash my baby's diapers in my husband's summer uniform with that little washboard. And oh, how I hated, Arnie, that crease in those summer uniforms, those shirts and pants. But while I was there, I think if it hadn't been the worry about the war, that would have been the happiest day of my life, because my husband could come in every night and he would bring 4 or 5 of his buddies in, and they would bring food from the PX, stuff that I couldn't buy because everything was rationed. There was a shortage of everything we took for granted: flour, sugar, butter, milk, just everything we took for granted. And they would bring this food in, and I would cook a meal for them while they played with the baby. I have pictures of them playing with the baby. I'd listen to their Army gripes and look at their family pictures and laugh at their jokes. And I felt like a sister to them. And I was happy that I could give a little home life to these men that were so far from home and probably maybe had children of their own. But then the day came when my husband said, I won't be coming back. This is my last night. So my blood turned to ice. What was I going to do? So neither one of us slept that night, and it was still dark when he got up the next morning. And as he walked past that coal pile, past that two-story building, he turned and he waved, and he said he carried that picture of me holding the baby in my arms all through the war. Well, the next morning I was horrified to find out that they had held up his paycheck because of him being sent overseas. So I was hanging my baby's diapers up to dry, and I was crying. And the other servicemen's wives from the building asked me what was wrong. When I told them, they took up a collection and they helped me pack and took me to the train. Well, then I went to Port Arthur, Texas, where I stayed with my husband's parents. And while I was there, I got a job at lunchtime. I'm a waitress all my life, and I got a lunchtime job. And one day, as I was getting off the bus, 3 blocks from home, now you got to remember that news of a casualty or something is carried by Western Union, and in a small town, it's by a Western Union boy on a bicycle. I got off the bus 3 blocks from home, and I spotted this Western Union boy going down the street, stopped at our front door. I ran those 3 blocks into the house crying, "Give it to me, Mother, give it to me." She said, "Give you what, honey?" I says, "Give me that telegram. I know something's happened to Ed." She says, "No, honey," she said, "it's my daughter. She's coming to visit." We held on to one another and cried. That's the kind of stress and strain we lived under as we waited for our loved ones. And I imagine it's the same kind of stress and strain that the families today are feeling while their loved ones are fighting. I stayed there until, I guess, in Port Arthur, Texas, with my in-laws for a while, and my baby got sick, so I had to come home. And I had sublet our apartment, and I gave notice, so I moved back into our apartment, and from then on, I waited until my husband came home.
And we mentioned your husband, and if we could, let's give him a little plug here. He went overseas.
My husband went overseas. He landed about 6 days after D-Day, and he fought all the way from Omaha Beach all the way into the outskirts of Germany. He watched the Russians come in on the other side of the Elbe River, and he said all of his life he was carry anger in him because they wouldn't let our men go over and fight the Russians because of what the Russians were doing to the German people.
The Russians didn't take kind to
No, they didn't. They
what
were
the Germans
raping,
had done to them prior.
They were raping and everything else over there. But then I got a notice that he was coming home. So we went to Jefferson Barracks. And incidentally, I'm living in Jefferson Barracks right now, right across from National Cemetery. I've lived there for the last 52 years. And walked up to this here soldier. Naturally, when we saw one another, it was heaven. But then this little 1.5-year-old boy looked up at this man. I had been keeping, pardon me.
It's okay.
I had been keeping pictures of my husband as a soldier in front of the baby. And this little boy looked up at this soldier and he said, "My daddy's a soldier too." And my husband picked him up and he said, "I'm your daddy's son." The little boy said, "I want a Coke." My husband left everybody and took the baby over to the PX and bought him a Coke. But then again, he was never the same. He was never the same. For about 25 years, he suffered after effects of this war. He would wake up in the middle of the night screaming.
And that's really, I guess, one of the reasons we're having the show this today is the memories of what the experience of during the World War II and the battles on the home front and also in there, I think are getting lost as each generation passes on the stories. I think it's important that my generation and my children's generation, that we're told and that these stories continue. And with that, we have with us today Harold Miller. And I guess it's Corporal Miller, is it? Was Corporal Miller, who was drafted into the service and had, I guess we don't want to say the fortune of having served overseas in the battles, but you were there. You were in the Battle of the Bulge. You participated.
Yeah.
I guess my question is, what was it like? How did it change your life? What did you go through? I can't imagine it. So if you can just maybe share a little bit of your experiences.
Well, you got to admit that we were scared. We did a lot of praying to get home. And you know that it's very possible that you're going to be killed. In fact, I come mighty close to it several times in the invasion. We docked with our LST and 6:30 in the morning when we supported the 29th Division, and an airplane, only one airplane happened to get in, and we were taken on wounded, had doctors and nurses taking care of them in the hull of the litters they were on, and he almost put this bomb right in there. And it went on the north side of it, and when it exploded, I thought the ship was going down, and I accidentally got excited and put my radio vest on and not had it on, but I pulled the trigger and this thing started to blow up, so half of it was blowing up, and I had to stay with that clumsy thing until we got on the beach.
Now, we talked about, you mentioned the beach here. You were, I guess, really unfortunate in your war histories. You didn't get to the Battle of the Bulge. You were a veteran of battles by then. You were part of the Normandy invasion.
Yes.
Uncle Sam must have really not liked you.
No, that was Roosevelt. I don't think he did, because he did make a remark to the mothers that there would be nobody on the high seas at Christmas time. That was in 43. And lo and behold, on the 23rd of December, we boarded the Queen Mary. And we got into Glasgow on January the 1st, New Year's Eve. And then went to England to get our equipment and get settled. And then we went down to Exmouth. And we were on the bluffs at Exmouth and had our guns energized there, you might say. We didn't really have to shoot the 90 millimeter. They did shoot some of the 50 calibers, but they were there to use if we needed them. And then from there, after a couple of months, we went in the convoy. It was 5,000 ships in that convoy going over to France.
And obviously, you know, the invasion was successful and the Allied troops were making progress. So we fast forward a couple years, and I guess this is the last, you know, German stance. In the Argonne Valley, that's where the Germans were going to make their move, winner take all. And
Yeah.
initially, you were extremely outnumbered, I understand, as to Allied troops versus the German troops.
You mean in the Battle of the Bulge?
In the Battle of the Bulge.
Yes, that's true. And the idea, Hitler wanted to also capture the port there of Antwerp, and also he needed gasoline, and right up our D battery was keeping track. I was taking care of the 2 million gallons of gasoline there, and it has been written up that if they would have took over that dump, as we call it, that would have helped them out, and they might have been able to win that battle. That's what the articles have said.
So give a little, I guess, introduction into the battle. I mean, what was leading up? Where were the troops outlined? What was the general region and area that this, battle started in? The area about it. Where were you stationed?
I was in Malmedy. That's where the Malmedy massacre was. There was 150 guys from a battery of field artillery. I think it was of the 106th Division, which he was a member. And they walked in this restaurant, and the Germans, when they come over through our lines, they changed all the street signs, moved them around, so your maps wasn't worth anything. And then these fellas asked where they wanted to go, Well, right away, they seen the Germans, so they took them outside and they got them in a circle on the side of the tavern, cafe, or whatever you want. That's about what it was. And they put them in a big circle. And then all of a sudden, a 19-year-old German got up with his pistol and started shooting in there. And then the rest of the Germans, they started machine guns and whatnot in there and shooting them up. And then they walked around and kicked some of the guys and see if they were still alive. Then they'd shoot them some more. And there was 66 of them, or 64, that were able to get away. And one of them was Charles Dunning, a movie actor, and he gave quite a report on that on the anniversary of the Battle of the Bulge 10, 12 years ago.
And these were just American soldiers who just happened to wander into this part of the German town, or?
Yeah, I don't know, they were, well, it was so foggy you couldn't hardly see across this table. And besides the coldest winter in 100 years. So they were lost because the signs were all changed and so forth, so they didn't know where to go. And that's how they got caught.
And did they know at that time they were approaching the German front lines, or that the Germans were close?
No, when you're lost like that, in a strange country, you don't know where you're at. In fact, this Charles Dunning, he didn't get back. It took him 6 months to get back to some American outfits because he had to work at night and not knowing where to go. He could have walked right into a German group and been gone.
So what else was in the area in the Argonne Valley, Ardennes Valley there? What was the terrain like? The situation?
It was pine. Actually, the Ardennes forest is a handmade forest. They set out all these long needle pine trees some years ago, before the war, and they were all nice tall trees. And then with the big pine needles and everything, as the infantry guys can tell you, you get underneath a tree and I get a tree burst. When we had that snow, about 1.5 feet of snow, and the climate was around 30 degrees below, and I know that because some officer come by our gun and he said it's 29 below zero. He says, be sure to keep all your skin covered. And which is hard to do. We didn't have much clothing to do. But I happen to have a hood mask like that I pulled over my head I bought in New York before I left. And everybody took turns with it when they went on the gun.
This is 40 days of battle in dead of winter in
Yeah, 41 days is what they say.
41.
Yeah.
How did the U.S. Army equip you? Were they prepared for this battle in detail, for the length, the severity of it? As a soldier's perspective, what do you believe?
I believe we really needed some clothes. The jacket I got here is way better than what we had, and it's we had the woolen underwear, which helped out, but our feet was always cold as anything, and I was able to, being on I can't think of the word now of the gun for any tank unit. That's what we were doing. We were trained for it, but we were hoping never getting it. But anyway, we got it. That's what we come into Malmedy for, to stop their tanks moving around. And we took over a brick house. It was an older. Since you're in Belgium, we were in friendly people, and we took over the house as much as far as we came in, and she stayed into, and there was some heat, certain amount of heat in there, and so we did get our chance to thaw out a little bit. But even so, at 30 and below, and some places it was 40, but I'm glad I didn't get there. But
30 seems cold enough for me.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if the other 10.
Have you ever been out in 25 degree below? You don't know any difference.
And I've actually had the, I guess, unfortunate aspect of, yes, I've been with a wind factor of 50 below outdoors in the mountains, and it is not pleasant and it's cold, but I could imagine having to live in there. Or mine was a few minutes here and there, and I got to go back indoors. I can't imagine what it would be like just to have to live. And housing, I mean, you mentioned you had this one house, but for the most part, where did you stay? What was your, housing like? Were these tents, grounds? Did you have buildings?
Well, most of it, 99% of the time, I was in a little pup tent. And we would dig down that pup tent about a foot deep. So if there was any bombs or shells coming, the shrapnel would go over you, not through you. So that was like the infantry guys in a foxhole. But it served several purposes, But we had a little room to get dressed and undressed and so forth, but we didn't do too much undressing or anything because we didn't take our shoes off. Like the infantry, we lived in what we had, and I guess the dirt and stuff on our skin was an insulation.
Now, for the battle here, was this an offensive from the German side, and yours was the Allies' defensive, or were the Allies going north? Was this two offensive units going after each other? How would you describe the battle? I mean, why were the Allied forces there, and why were the Germans coming through?
Well, for one thing, as I'm told, in World War I, they come to the same place. So there must be something to that area. I understand it's kind of flat, and they were able to travel better. But Hitler's the one that he wanted really to go through and separate Britain from us, and he figured that he could really manipulate the British into safekeeping, so they'd be on his side. But they never would have been that way. They had too much against them.
The Britons.
Yeah.
Well, with this battle, and I don't know if you knew, I guess at that time would have been technician 5th class, Don.
Please, 5th grade.
5th grade, excuse me. 5th grade. At the time of the battle, but obviously you're familiar with him now. But serving alongside with you, or at least in the same general region there in the battle, we have Don Green here, and you had the fortune to serve about 20 months in Europe.
Yeah, that's correct.
And I know this was just like me. It was a wonderful vacation. We got to go see the European countryside, interact with the locals.
Spend all my time in the French resorts.
That's
yeah,
it.
Right.
So,
how cold a day was that?
yeah. So give us another perspective. You were actually there, and this is combat now.
Yeah.
We're not like.
Well, I was 18 years old, right out of high school, and our division was made up of schoolboys. There was an ASTAF, or Army Specialized Training Force, and our 106th Infantry Division, the infamous 106th, had taken all the trained personnel out to set them over as infantry replacements, and they put in 2,000 schoolboys like myself, and some Air Corps people who discontinued, and field artillery and coast artillery people that they didn't need anymore. So we landed at Le Havre, and we moved up to replace the 2nd Infantry Division, and we were in an area, my regiment, my company, overlooking a little German town of Prum.
Okay.
And
Don, if we're going to interrupt you, because I understand from having met you before and talked, I guess this wasn't your original intent, was just to join this combat battle. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a quick break here so we can get some of our sponsors out here on our program, and then we're going to come back and listen to a little about how Don Green got into this part of the country, and then really what it was like to actually be a combat soldier in the Battle of the Bulge.
Infantryman.
So, infantryman, as he likes to refer, as you can tell, non-military. With that, we'll be right back.
It's like going to Harvard in Jefferson County.
Students have the best education possible.
Top-notch education.
Quality education is a 10.
I love the fact that Jefferson College is so close to my home.
It's great. I love it. It works for my schedule.
The housing is incredibly convenient.
Class schedules are very convenient for students.
I'm Stacy Self.
I'm Kimberly Clark.
I'm Nick Schaefer.
I'm Della Selman, and I discovered my future at Jefferson College.
We're back, and with us is wonderful individuals Millie Canese, Don Green, and now we're talking, Harold Miller, and we're talking with Don Green. And Don was a young high school.
18 years old.
Comes out, he says, "Mom, Dad, I want to see the world," and Uncle Sam has given me free tuition to see.
And a brown suit.
And to go visit and see Europe. And so for 20 years, you took a European vacation. Excuse me, 20 months,
yeah.
You took a European vacation.
Right. I came out of the ASTAF program, which is Army Specialized Training Force, which they discontinued, and shipped me into the 106th Infantry Division. And we went into the lines to relieve the 2nd Division on our outfit overlooked Prum, Germany. And we were told that we were going into this area because it was a quiet area and we could get some combat experience. And so I said, well, that's not bad. But that lasted about 3 to 4 days. And then the German offensive on the 16th of December, that started. And we managed to hold our position, my regiment, my company, we held our position for 2 days, which was remarkable. The balance of our division, we were the infamous 106th. And there's been a book written about our escapades. It's called The Death of a Division. And in a little over 72 hours, our division sustained 7,000 casualties. That's a 7 with 3 big zeros.
And how large is a division when you
About
start?
12,000 people, and when you take in all the units. But we lost our first 2 regiments, the 422s, the 423s, and our 1st battalion of my regiment. We were in the unit I was in, overlooking Prum. The outfit next to us was the 114th Regiment out of the 28th Division. That was also sent to that area because they had been up in the Hurtgenfars, and they came back with about 1/5 of their personnel. But we managed to hold out there for 2 days, and then we start fighting a delaying action across the Our River, and then in front of Bastogne, we were holding positions, fighting delaying actions. And we did that for 3.5 to 4 days till they could get all the paratroopers out of the houses of ill repute in Paris. But to be honest with you, they were retooling after the Remagen Bridge. And the 82nd came up and was supposed to go to Bastogne first, but the part at Elsenborn Ridge was so critical, they moved the 82nd up there. And then 4 days later, they brought in, or 3.5 days later, they brought in the 101st. And after the 101st came in, then my unit, what was left of us, we were assigned to patrol the Skyline Drive, which was the main nice 2-lane blacktop road between Bastogne and Saint-Vith. Now, if you look at this and study this battle in any depth, there are 3 key major points to this battle. One was Elsenborn Ridge, which is the highest point in Belgium. The Saint-Vith, which is the most major road junction in Belgium. And there was Bastogne, which was the second major road junction in Belgium. Now, if you want to get an idea what the terrain was like, drive through the Ozarks onto some of the backcountry roads, and you come down out of the hills into these towns, and there's 3 or 4 roads going out. That's the way those were. Now, Hitler was supposed to clear the Ardennes and be over the Meuse River at Namur in 24 hours. Well, he didn't quite make it. After we were patrolling the Skyline Drive, we were sent back up to Saint-Vith to join up with the 7th Armored and other units, stragglers they called them. And we made up some real funny-looking outfits. There were tankers, cooks, and musicians, and what was left of some units. And they put up a stiff defense at Saint-Vith, so much so that it held up the Germans for 5 to 6 days. And then to aid in the combat in this particular situation, Chafe headquarters in Eisenhower decided to split the battlefield in half, give the north half to Montgomery, my friend, and the south half to Bradley for, expedite command in this situation. Bradley took one look at the situation at Saint-Vith after they took it over, and we were a salient about a mile or mile and a half wide. It's just like the gap in your finger here. We were here, and the Germans were on either side. And Montgomery looked at the thing, and he said, nope, we're going to pull back. He said, we're going to tidy up the battlefield. So we did. And we pulled back to Versailles and established a further line on the battlegrounds there. By then, they were starting to get our units reorganized, what was left of us. Now, Harold's unit was off someplace else, and I find out that my current wife's husband was in the 75th Division, and they brought his regiment in from southern France to go in and fill in the holes of the people of our division that were led. The 106th was never reorganized as a unit. They kept the 424 regiment that I was in as a single entity and paired it up with a paratrooper combat division for the rest of the war. What I like to tell the students in our lecture series and anybody who will take the time to listen to me is that we weren't fighting just one enemy. We were fighting 2. And Harold has alluded to it. And it was the horrendous temperature change. You don't go from 30, 40 degrees to 25, 30 below zero. Now, in January, there was a stretch in excess of some 21 or 23 days where the temperature was sub-zero. That means that those straight continuous days, it was below zero, period. Now, the people, and I also tell these youngsters that if you want to really see what the war is like, get out in these combat conditions like that, and if you're unfortunate enough to be injured or wounded, and you are not evacuated within 2, 3, maybe 4 hours, there's a simple fact of life that occurs. You froze to death. But just that simple. We managed to get back to St. Vith, and on Christmas Eve, we got a great Christmas present. Everybody has seen the place where General Patton asked his senior chaplain to prepare a prayer for him to get rid of the rain and snow and fog. It started snowing and raining in, I think, about Thanksgiving. And it wasn't until Christmas Eve that the weather changed. And on Christmas Eve, the sun came out bright and brilliant. Everybody wondered, what is that bright light? But you could hear it before it even occurred to you in your area. You could hear the roar of aircraft engines. And they had every airplane the Allies had airborne that particular day because it was clear sunshine. And it was wall to wall. I think the closest cloud then was maybe Boston or Chicago. But they had the aircraft coming up, and the Pathfinder elite aircraft, the Pathfinder aircraft to lead the bombers, always jumped tinfoil out, or regular tinfoil. And that was to jam the German radar. And they had radar. Let's don't lie to each other about it. But and Harold alluded to the fact that here were these huge, gorgeous 40, 50, 60-foot pine trees, brilliant sunshine, all this snow and ice, and all this tinfoil floating down on the trees. And it was a real pastoral scene. It really, we all were stopped and stood up and gawked and looked because it was so pretty and so beautiful. And to this day, I use tinfoil on my Christmas tree. And I got a hold of some a couple of years ago, and it was plastic. How revolting. But one of the ladies in our auxiliary found some made in Germany with tinfoil. But they came down out of the trees, and it was a beautiful sight to behold, but some idiot took a shot at us and then ruined the whole thing. But so we were back in the combat again, and I was evacuated out. We managed to get our units back fairly well reassembled into our original regiment. And the first thing they did when we got there is they made the stragglers, that's what they called us. The guys have been separated from the regular units. They made us line up and sit down and take our shoes off. And what are these guys, what are these idiots up to? So when they took our shoes off, they came around inspecting our feet. Well, we had these regular GI boots, didn't have hardy packs or snowshoes or snowpack shoes, and you had socks, and the Army preached and prayed to you every day, change your socks. Well, we would change our socks once a day, and I don't know who came up with it, but you sit down there, your tootsies out, take your socks and wring them out as dry as possible, and take the pair you had between your underwear and your skin, put them on, and put those wet ones down in there. And by the next day, they were fairly dry. But there was one thing wrong with that, is after you put those fairly dry socks on, what'd you do with your feet? You stuck them back in the wet boots. So at first they were going to court-martial men who had frostbite, or they called it trench foot. But there was such a horrendous, there were 40,000 men in the European theater that suffered frostbite, trench foot as they call it. But they had us lined up and they were looking at us, and the guy says, you go on over there, you go over there, and he stopped and looked at me, and he says, you go over there and get in that ambulance. I said, what's wrong? He says, you got little purple streaks on your left foot. I said, so? He says, that means gangrene's setting in. Get in the ambulance. So I got back to First General in Paris, and they evacuated everybody because there were so many casualties. They evacuated us back to England. And I was put in the hospital in England, and they had little tents over people with wounded feet. And the young doctor came in, he took the back and he looked at me, he says, well, I've got bad news for you, son. Well, I was 18 years old, I was son to everybody. And I said, what is it? He said, we're going to have to amputate your left foot at your ankle. And I gave him a typical GI answer. I said, you and whose army? So we got to talking about it, and he said, well, I'll make you a deal. He said, I'll give you massive penicillin shots, and if that doesn't work, I'll have to take your leg off just below the knee. So it did work. I didn't lose my foot. And to this day, I wish to God I'd remembered the man's name because he actually saved my foot. I didn't get out of the hospital again until March. And then I was referred back to the replacement depot, and it was eventually wound up in a repo depot. That's what they call a replacement depot. And somebody found out I had a little time working, delivering mail before I went in the military, so they thought, oh, we'll put him in the APO unit. So I finished the war in the APO unit, and the APO unit moved up and became an occupational unit. So the balance after the war was over, I spent as in the Army Postal Unit in the occupational troops. But the Battle of the Bulge was the largest land battle fought during World War II. Harold alluded to the number of people involved, and there was 1 million people involved, both Germans and Americans. And when the war started, if you look at the map over there on that line front, that they showed the battlefield front on the date the battle started, on the 16th. It was, 24, 25 miles or something like that. 4 regiments, 4 divisions, and a couple of units from some armored outfit. And that was what was on the line, outnumbered 4 to 1 on the day the battle started on the 16th. And when the battle ended in January, I think 17th or something like that, there were 34 infantry divisions and 7 armored divisions. So they moved in that many men to offset what this was. The big thing was that Hitler was trying for Antwerp. He was trying to separate the forces and trying to make peace terms on his terms. They already knew that the Allies were asking for unconditional surrender. And what they were trying to do was avoid that. Now, I've read since then that the reason it was such a big surprise to the intelligence service of the Allied army, that Hitler had everything, every order about this battle was either verbal, or one officer to another, or it was written, handed to him, he let him read it, and then he destroyed it. And anybody that broadcast it on radio or any message that would have been intercepted was executed on the spot where they stood. So there was complete, total secrecy. But they still couldn't figure out where he got all the tanks and where he got all the ammunition and where he got all of the infantry. But I know that some of the men they captured near the end of the Bulge were submariners, the Kriegsmarine, that they just used as infantrymen. And some of the people they captured were 15, 16-year-old boys. And I thought I was young at 18. But can you imagine what those youngsters went through?
So basically, the Battle of the Bulge was Hitler's last stand. It was
Last
do or
gasp.
die.
It was a do or die. And he did manage to have one tank make the Moselle River. And it's still there to this day. And the British brought some of their people down from in the British sector, and they lined up on the bank, the west or east side the northwest side of the Meuse River, and that was their last line of defense. They were to hold it if Hitler managed to break through. But there were so many individual fighters, and he alluded to the Malmedy massacre, and everybody within 24 hours on the entire western front of the Allies knew about it. That's all the way from the Baltics to the Mediterranean Sea. They knew about it. And if you were fighting this delaying action, you were trying your best, and you figured you were going to get outnumbered, well, you're going to be captured. When they found out they were shooting the prisoners of war, everybody says, what's the difference? They're going to shoot us anyway. So I think it's definitely the resolve of the individual combat personnel that they just stood up and said, that's enough. We're going to stop right here. They're going to shoot us anyway, so we're going to shoot back.
And with that, I guess the numbers, which to me just seem astronomical, seems that there were over 19,000 American forces killed. KI. And there were over 15,500 on the German troops.
Yeah, but that's a figure that they've never been able to really substantiate. They figure that double that, and you're probably more accurate because they were the attacking force at the beginning.
And they also say, though, over 23,000, I guess, American forces were captured or missing.
Yeah.
What happened? I mean, where did the Germans do with the prisoners? I mean, where could they have gone?
They walked them.
Numbers?
They walked them back east, under guard, and put them on trains. And some of them wound up in POW camps in Austria, southern Germany, central Germany. Some of them wound up in not Bitburg, but that was a civilian, something like Dachau.
Gatorman.
Yeah, there were any number of places they took them, but they put them on those 40 and 8s. They'd bring the equipment and men and supplies up, and they'd throw 40 and 50 guys in a boxcar. They couldn't sit down, they couldn't stand up. To relieve yourself, you shifted around, went in the corner. There was no facilities for you. But they did manage to, take the POWs back, prisoners of war, back to the detention camps they had. Now, some of my unit, for the 422s, wound up in Austria, in some of those prison camps stacked there, and some I remember that there were 2 or 3 of our men who were captured. Did you ever read the book Slaughterhouse-Five?
Yes.
Okay, those men were from the 106th Division, the man who wrote it, and the Slaughterhouse-Five. And they sent them around to different parts of the country to make them dig and, help clean up the bomb wreckage. But they took care of them. They managed to win. They didn't feed very much. A lot of them been starved to death. And a lot of them were beriberi and rickets and dysentery. The dysentery was just absolutely ridiculous. But yeah, they did capture them.
Well, it's definitely an important part of American history, and unfortunately, it's knowledge and information that seems to be waning and losing generation for generation. But we're actually fortunate enough that you two gentlemen were part of a group of 110 interviews down to a book was released on your stories and your experiences of what happened here. A book called Victory Through Valor. It's a collection of World War II memories. And if there's anyone who is at all interested in the history of World War II, and not through Hollywood's eyes, not through the glamour, but through the actual stories and experiences of the soldiers that were there. There is Victory Through Valor. It is available at gatewayvbob.org. You can order it. It's available online at Amazon.com. Also, Barnes & Noble and Borders bookstores can order this book for you. And if you just think this is just a hodgepodge collections, this book was on one of the listed in St. Louis and one of the 2008 Best of St. Louis. The St. Louis Post had this down as the best of 2008 books.
Yes.
And I would encourage anyone who is interested at all in the history of World War II, and more so the Battle of the Bulge, to get this book. It's $24.99, very reasonable.
I'd like to say this about the book. Everybody reads the history books of all the historians. They hear about the Pattons and the Eisenhowers and the Audie Murphys, the big heroes. I'm not taking anything away from it. But in that book is a collection of stories and events of the average man who really, really won the war.
And that again is the Victory Through Valor. It's a terrific book. Gentlemen, Ms. Knies, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your lives to come here this afternoon to be on this program and to basically relive the history, because you can tell it is emotional to you and it's very personal, and we thank you for letting us into your lives.
Well, we thank you for the opportunity to speak out so people do not forget.
And we would like the news to get out to more schools so that we can continue to go to these schools and,
For history classes.
Tell our story.
The colleges or high schools, whatever.
And if they wanted to, say someone wanted to get in touch with you to come to have you speak at their schools, where is it through the website, or how would we get a hold of you if someone wanted to bring you to their schools?
They can call Harold at his home. He's
You
usually
could email me.
email Millie.
And we do have an email, and that is Millie,
Milledi, M-I-L-L-E-D-I.
Milledi at AOL.com. And she'll organize these fine gentlemen. She'll drag them down to your program.
They can call me at my home. And the area code is 314-961-6556. And I will take the information and give it to our assignment officer for distribution to whatever area it is in. We have 3 speaking teams. And from the end of October through November, we're very busy. Everybody wants us there on Veterans Day.
Veterans Day. So we've got 11 months that we can fill the void. Again, That's Harold Miller, Don Green, Miller Canese. Again, thank you very much.
Thank you.